The Boys, Dear Becky, written by Garth, Ennis, art by Russ, Braun. Alright, The Boys, Dear Becky, the sequel/prequel miniseries set 10 years after the events of the original Boys series. Now, I'm a big fan of the original comic. I did a series of videos breaking the entire series down. Check that out if you haven't seen it. And with the success of the Amazon TV show, Garth Ennis and Dannymalt Comics wanted to cash in a bit and put out some more comics set in the Boys universe. Now, it's of course fun having the Boys back and being able to see some adventures of Butcher, Hughie, Annie, the female mother's milk, Greg Mallory, Frenchie, etc. So it's fun being back in that world. And there is some good stuff in this miniseries, some analysis on Butcher and what made him have to metaphorically kill Becky so he could do what needed to be done and try to wipe out all the heroes like he did in the original series. So interesting thoughts there. And it's fun seeing the Boys' adventure. However, I want to lower all of your expectations before we get into this video because this miniseries is very disappointing. Garth Ennis, he goes on a lot of political ramblings, and I don't mind politics in my comics if it's done well, but it wasn't really done well in this series. And there's also lots of convoluted plot elements. Anyway, I will save my review for the end of the video and really dive into that more, but I just want to curb your enthusiasm as we get into this. So let's dive into it. The Boys, Dear Becky miniseries, and we can see if Garth Ennis justifies the existence of continuing the story here. Issue 1, Saturday. This issue opens up 12 years after the climactic events of the Boys series. We are in the Scottish town of Austerladle, which is Hughie's hometown. Hughie is still with Annie, and they are temporarily staying in Scotland here until Hughie can sell his parents' home. Hughie is hanging out with his transgender friend Bobby, whom you may remember from Volume 8 of The Boys, the Highland Laddie miniseries. Bobby gives Hughie a hard time saying, "Hey, you called me Bobby with a Y, not with an I." Now that Bobby's a girl, he doesn't like that. Hughie says, "No, I didn't. I said it with an I." Bobby laughs though. He was just messing with Hughie and giving Hughie a hard time. Hughie, he goes to grab some more drinks. The barkeep, a Mr. Holmes, aka Beezer, who hates Hughie, tells Hughie, "I pray every night you get cancer of the cock and die." And Hughie, not thinking much of it, says, "Seems a wee bit extreme, Beezer." And Beezer tells Hughie, "And then you stick it up your tranny pal's ass and he gets it too." Hughie just completes his order and rejoins Bobby at the table. None of them really care too much about what Beezer says nowadays. Now, Hughie is talking with Bobby about Twitter warriors who are super woke and how phony they are, and various other woke things that annoy him, like white male privilege, to affirmative action, to the fact that there's no black cast members on Friends, and that somehow that annoys people. All this new woke stuff is just supremely annoying Hughie. Now, Bobby, he eventually asks Hughie if he's going to try to have any kids with Annie, but Hughie says Annie can't have kids, something to do with when she was younger. Besides, Hughie says that he's seen the world at its worst and he doesn't like the idea of bringing an innocent child into it. And Annie, she had a rough time when she was a kid as well, so they just don't want to have kids. Bobby eventually says that he was glad there was no bloody superhuman apocalypse 10 years ago. He says, "I'm glad the Yanks managed to stop those bastards in front of the Pentagon." So right now he's referring to the events of the original series. Bobby continues, "But honestly, it looks like we're perfectly capable of fucking up the world all by ourselves. So even without the soups and them out of the way, the world still managed to be all messed up." Hughie jumps in, "Well, if we are messing up the world, we're not gonna fix it by clawing each other's eyes out on the way up the moral high ground." And Bobby replies to Hughie saying, "Oh, Hughie, you really do not like the wokery-pokery, do you? I'm not saying I disagree with you that much. There's an awful lot of self-serving bollocks, but I don't know, man. There's times I think you're a wee bit hard on folks." Hughie and Bobby, they head outside to the beach, and they talk about that bartender, old Beezer, that they saw in the bar earlier. Hughie says, old Beezer told him that he hopes both of them get coronavirus. By the way, I guarantee that line was not in the original script, and Garth Ennis edited it in there in the last moment, because it doesn't really fit with the rest of the story right now. Bobby talks about the world without all these superhumans, but all the bad stuff that's going on in the world, like that dickhead in the White House, referring to Trump, and fucking Brexit, and the planet being on fire. Do you think it's just life going back to what it would have been anyway without the soups? Hughie says that he never thought he'd say this, but he's glad his parents aren't around to see how things are going. It would have broken their hearts. So we learn here that Hughie's parents have indeed passed away in the years since the original series ended. Bobby, talking about Brexit, says, "Can you believe we had folks around here voting leave, even though we're in Scotland?" Saying stuff like, "We don't like immigrants. What fucking immigrants in Scotland, ye das cunts?" Hughie comments, "Good luck living in the ass end of nowhere without any EU funding." So we're about halfway through issue 1, and we don't have that much actual story going on. We mostly just have Garth Ennis giving his political thoughts on Trump, Brexit, and woke culture we have today. Bobby asks Hughie if he's ever going to marry Annie, and if they are going to get married, can he be her bridesmaid and his best man? Hughie laughs at this, but Hughie tells Bobby not to start. Hughie explains that he's here in Scotland because his parents' house has to be sold, but that sale fell through, so now he's waiting to put the house back on the market. And Bobby says, "Well, you've been waiting a while." Bobby asks Hughie, "So what have you been doing for work the last 10 years or so?" And Hughie says that he has a pension from his last job, and let's just leave it at that. Hughie, he then gets a text from Annie, and Annie says a mystery parcel has arrived for Hughie in the mail at their place. Before Hughie heads back home, him and Bobby, they have a toast, and Hughie says, "Here's to the world getting worse slower than it's probably going to." And Bobby cheers to that, and then he asks Hughie before they part, "You're not a superhero, are you?" And Hughie denies it. "I'm not a freaking superhero, Jesus Christ." Hughie returns to his late parents' house where him and Annie are staying, and he sees that package that Annie told him about on the phone that was waiting for him. Hughie opens the package and sees it's a book, so he takes the book to the bathroom to give it a read. And when he opens the book, the page reads, "Dear Becky." Hughie reads it some more, and he realizes that this is Becky's diary, Butcher's deceased wife. You'll remember that Butcher's wife kept the diary back when she was alive. Well, it appears that this diary is Becky's, but Butcher wrote some footnotes and additions to it, so his own little commentary in the diary. Hughie freaks out when he sees this. He falls off the toilet and cowers on the floor for a bit because Butcher is like a ghost in his past he doesn't want to revisit. Hughie, though, he eventually picks up the diary once again and reads it some more. In the diary, Butcher is writing about how much he loves his wife and is writing back to her in the diary. Butcher recounts a story where, back in the day, Frenchie, Mother's Milk, the female, and Greg Mallory were hunting down a rogue superhuman. This superhuman appears to just be a 10-year-old boy. The female grabs the boy's tongue, and Butcher cuts the kid's tongue right off. The boy screams. We see in the bathroom there's a blade and blood everywhere from the boy's mouth. Butcher and the crew begin to wash their hands and prepare to leave the bathroom. The angry boy, though, now missing his tongue, is trying to speak, and it is now revealed the boy is a parody of the DC hero Shazam. And right now he is in his 10-year-old boy form, but he is trying to say the magic word to transform into his powerful adult superhuman form. But he's failing because his tongue was cut off. So we see the boy trying to say the magic word, Shazam! 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 But the boy can't say the name properly and he can't transform. The little Shazam boy is pissed, but the boys did their job successfully. Butcher, though, he's looking at this kid who hates him so much, and Butcher feels good about the work that he is doing, but there's a small part of him that also feels bad because this was just a 10-year-old kid. Butcher would never admit it to the rest of the boys, but he feels this remorse a little bit. And he knows that the reason that he feels that is because of Becky. And he imagines Becky touching his shoulder right then, but of course she is not actually there, but she's still impacting his choices. The female, she punches the little kid in the belly and he falls down. Butcher writes in the diary, "You're still there, Becky. All the good stuff you've done for me and got me to believe about myself, that's you, and I don't know why, but I feel like you're getting stronger. You aren't going nowhere anytime soon, but you see, I just can't have that because the way things are looking with the soups, they're going to get worse, which means the things I'll have to do are going to get worse. God forgive me, love, but I think what I've got to do is kill you." I assume Butcher is speaking metaphorically here because his wife is already dead at this point, but Butcher, he has to kill her voice in his head that is stopping him from doing the work that he needs to do to kill all these soups. Hughie, he is kind of surprised as he reads this. He closes the book and he stares at it for a bit, and Annie calls to him from outside the bathroom and asks if he is okay. And that is the end of issue 1. The Boys Dear Becky issue 2, Sunday. Hughie visits his parents' graves. He apologizes for not talking to them more when they were alive. He discusses his relationship with Annie and how he keeps finding excuses not to marry her and how he feels guilty about keeping secrets from her. We have a flashback now to the classic boys days, the days before Hughie was on the team, when Greg Mallory was still in charge. Greg Mallory, he has given the boys a briefing on a new British superhero team called the Scorchers. The members of the Scorchers are Sex Vicar, Teen Temptress, Pouncing Poof, Black Thug, and Loony Lefty. The boys comment how unusual their names are. Mother's Milk explains that the Scorchers are the first superhero team proposed, funded, and launched by Von American's Media Corp division and not from their usual superhuman development team. And this causes a little bit of a problem because that is where all their sources have been up to this point in superhero development. A new division in Von American running their own superhero team would definitely be a big shift. The concept behind the Scorchers is that they are supposed to be a team of anti-heroes, inspired by certain identifiable societal elements. They are ambiguous, edgy. Initially they're going to be bad, but then they're going to see the error of their ways and become good, and start being accepted by the other heroes. Now, this superhero team has been created by British business executive Julian Baxter Pugh, who is running the Media Corp division for Von American. Now, this division has never been allowed near superhuman development before in the past, but considering the move, it might just be the start of a catastrophic rift inside Von American, and Greg Mallory and Mother's Milk think they should exploit that rift. We jump across town to a funeral for a Viking warrior hero named Norska. Her husband, another Viking hero, is named Vicar. Vicar is saying a few words to mourn his wife. After the funeral ends and people start leaving, Butcher arrives to talk to this Vicar, and he catches Vicar in the act having sex with an overweight fan of his over his dead wife's coffin. Butcher interrupts, Vicar zips up, and the superfan leaves. Vicar, angry, asks Butcher what he wants. Butcher, he explains that he wants some info on this new team, the Scorchers, that he can use. And Vicar to this says, "Oh, we're not supposed to talk about them. We've all been told to back way off, no contact, be polite if we see them, but do not engage with them." Butcher wants this Vicar to find out why then. What's the deal with these Scorchers? Vicar, he refuses, but Butcher has some blackmail footage of Vicar having a cosmic wank with the Eternity Gauntlet, which I assume is like the Infinity Gauntlet from Marvel Comics. Vicar responds, "It was once, I got curious, it was just a stupid thing. Why should I have to suffer for that? I'm Vicar, I'm not supposed to get blackmailed." Butcher makes the point that even without the footage, Butcher is tougher than him and can toss him around. Butcher headbutts Vicar and then drags him over to the cremation oven in the funeral home there and sticks Vicar in it. Vicar, he's screaming, his face is burning. Butcher pulls Vicar out of the oven and we see Vicar's head from his chest up is just completely melted. Butcher tells him, "You'll heal with your magic potion or whatever, and when you do, get started on that little errand, finding out more about the Scorchers and Baxter Pugh and Soup Development vs. Media Corp." Butcher then leaves. After Butcher messed up this Vicar, he went to a diner and started writing a new entry in his diary. Butcher writes to Becky, admitting that he went a little bit too far with Vicar right then. He could have just smacked him around a little. He didn't have to melt his face off, but he did it because he was in a bad mood. Butcher, he feels like Greg Mallory is going too soft on the Soups, and he thinks that their team is not going about things the right way. Issue 3, Monday. It is the current day once again. We see Hughie and Annie are relaxing, going swimming. Hughie wants Annie to fly them across the bay to save time. She's reluctant to use her powers, but she does so. She says, "What if someone spots us?" Because you see, ever since the big superhuman battle around 10 years ago or so, the CIA has been keeping all superhero activity under wraps. No one wants the heroes to come back. So anytime there is a superhero spotted somewhere out there in the world doing something, the CIA stops those rumors, stops the online chatter about it. So Hughie says, they'll be fine. Annie can fly them across the bay. Annie then talks with Hughie about marriage, and Hughie's eyes go big. He still can't decide if he wants to get married or not, and he feels pressured about it. Annie laughs it off and tells him to relax. Married or not, we'll still be together. I love our adventures and I love staying still. Just don't keep me waiting, okay? We jump back to the past, once again, to a time when Becky was still alive and her and Butcher were together. They go to a bar, they laugh and joke and tease each other. They are just crazy about each other. They go home and make love, and in the morning they read the newspaper together. Butcher and Becky talk about how Butcher is a changed man now. He used to be drunk and violent and angry with the world before he met her, but ever since they've been together, Butcher has changed. He's a better man. He's no longer angry and picking fights with everyone. Now Becky, who's a social worker, talks about all the kids she works with every day and how there's something inside of them, all this horrible stuff inside of them that happened to them in the past, and it never really goes away for them. It leaves them wounded and they are resentful and frustrated. And one day when they least expect it, it all comes out. Butcher in many ways can relate to this. He had a very violent past that he struggles to move on from. He remembers his time in the war and with his abusive father and picking fights with everyone. Butcher ignores this though. He asks her, "You're safe when you're at work, ain't you, love? There ain't no one that's gonna hurt you or nothing? You're okay?" And Becky smiles and says, Of course I am." We jump forward in time a bit now to the classic boys days. Becky has now passed, and Butcher is working with Greg Mallory, Frenchie, Female, and Mother's Milk. They are still working this case on the Scorchers, and they are watching an interview with this Julian Baxter Pugh. Baxter Pugh is talking to the journalist, and the journalist accuses this Scorchers team of being racist and homophobic, with hero names like Black Thug and Pouncing Poof. Baxter Pugh, defending this, says, "Hey, all those heroes chose their own names. and it's a sacred, crucial part of the origin process, and the media needs to be more respectful. This is a good opportunity to begin a conversation about boundaries. Butcher can't believe the way this Julian Baxter Pugh talks. Butcher comments, "Begin a conversation about boundaries? What does that even mean?" Mother's Milk turns off the TV. Mother's Milk, he apparently did some investigating and found out all of this history about Julian Baxter Pugh and his time working for Von American and all the sketchy stuff he was up to. So Baxter Pugh first worked at Von American in 1993 for Von American Petroleum, a section of the business dealing with oil. And there was this incident called the Grand Savannah Dam that perhaps this Baxter Pugh was responsible for. So there was this flood, and all the animals were killed, as well as the tribe that lived there. And a new tribe moved in, and they didn't know that the new land they moved onto required farming techniques they weren't used to, and they all died as well. It was almost an ethnic cleansing. The whole thing is a total PR nightmare, but it seems like Von American kept it quiet. So Baxter Pugh, he has some of this shady history with this Grand Savannah Dam, and he apparently has some sort of working history with the Nazi superhero named Stormfront, who is one of Von American's more popular heroes. Julian Baxter Pugh and Stormfront specifically had some sort of history with this Grand Savannah Dam project. Mother's Milk thinks that Julian wants to use soups for stuff no one has ever thought of using them for before, and now that he's using MediaCorp to launch soups outside of the regular Von American stable that he alone controls, the whole thing is just very dangerous. Later on, Butcher goes to talk with that Vicar once again. Vicar's face has now healed up, and they are talking in the back of an alley. Butcher wants some info on the Scorchers and Stormfront and the connection to Julian Baxter Pugh. Butcher asks Vicar, "You're meant to be Stormfront's son, yeah? I mean, I know you ain't his son, you don't look at all like him, but that's what they call you, right? That you're Stormfront's kid?" Stormfront in the original Boys comic was a Nazi and one of the most powerful superheroes. Well, in the fake origin story that Von American made up for Stormfront, they said he was a Viking. Well, when Stormfront isn't with the hero group Payback, he would team up with another hero group called the Children of Stormfront, which this Vicar was a part of. Basically, Vought just threw all the random Viking heroes they had all together on a team and called them the Children of Stormfront. So Butcher asks this Vicar, how do you get in touch with Stormfront when you want to have a team up or whatever? And Vicar replies, we don't. He does. Daddy thinks he's too good for us. Vicar is referring to Stormfront sarcastically when he says daddy. Vicar continues, it's funny that you should mention the Children of Stormfront. And at that moment, we see the Children of Stormfront hero group all show up in that alley, ready to fight Butcher along with this Vicar. They all have this Viking gear on and look pretty imposing. Vicar introduces Butcher to Scandia, the female Viking warrior that is with them. She is a telepath. And Vicar says they are all going to beat the shit out of Butcher, and when they are done, Scandia will find out where Butcher has been keeping the blackmail footage of him masturbating with the Eternity Gauntlet. Butcher is not worried. He tells Vicar, look, we can do it this way if you want, but I don't recommend it. There is a better way to sort this all out. Vicar doesn't care. Him and the rest of the Children of Stormfront are ready to fight. Issue 4, Tuesday. Butcher is fighting the Children of Stormfront, and before they begin their fight though, Butcher, he snaps his fingers, and an air conditioning unit or something is thrown at one of Vicar's allies, knocking the guy out. And then the female shows up and she jumps on and lands on this guy's stomach, killing him. The female then lunges and attacks Scandia, and Scandia's freaking out. She's scared of the female. Butcher puts his arm around Vicar and tells him, "You think I wouldn't expect you to be pissed off after what I did to you the other day?" Butcher, see, he did not show up to this meeting alone and unprepared. He brought backup with him. The female is savagely beating all the other members of the Children of Stormfront, and Vicar is sad and crying that he and his team have failed so hard here right now. Frenchie arrives and he says to Butcher that the female insisted that she get to fight them alone. The female has severely beat up all the members of the Children of Stormfront. 1 or 2 of them are dead, 1 of them is going to be in a coma. Frenchie, he gives the female some sort of stuffed animal as a reward for her work here. But Frenchie tells her, no, first you must wash your hands. He doesn't want blood to get all over her new stuffed animals. Butcher tells Vicar that he wants him to go and have a talk with Stormfront and find out all about Julian Baxter Pugh and his connections to Stormfront and the Scorchers. Vicar, he really doesn't want to do this. He feels really uncomfortable around Stormfront. Stormfront always seems pissed off, like he's gonna swat you away and crush you. Butcher doesn't care though. He has Vicar in a really hard place right now. He sends Vicar off on his mission. Later on, Butcher is back at Boys HQ talking to Mother's Milk and Frenchie. Greg Mallory is away and the female is playing with her new stuffed animals. They are all discussing the transcript of the bugs at the Scorchers HQ and what they have picked up off of them. Apparently, Teen Temptress was complaining to Baxter Pugh earlier that she wants Vought to pay for new boobs for her, but Baxter turned her down and told her that soon enough she'll be able to buy them herself. Then they argued about royalties. Frenchie comments that after that the conversation got pretty boring. Butcher says that he planted a bug in Vicar's helmet, and Frenchie and Mother's Milk are surprised by this. They didn't have Greg Mallory's permission to do that. Mother's Milk asks, why did Butcher do this? And Butcher explains, so when Vicar goes to see Stormfront, if he tries to feed me a load of bullshit after, I'll know. And Frenchie tells Butcher, you know Mallory insists on great care when placing bugs. If one is discovered, it could lead to their organization's discovery. Butcher replies to Frenchie, hey, what Greg Mallory don't know won't hurt him. So this is another example of the rift between Greg Mallory and Butcher. Butcher feels like they should be doing something more aggressively, where Mallory is always taking a more slight, strategic, quiet approach. Mother's Milk chastises Butcher a bit and tells him, Butcher, man, you know that ain't the way it works. I mean, orders are orders, procedure is procedure, otherwise the whole goddamn thing collapses. You know what I'm talking about. You were in the military. And Butcher defends his actions by arguing, look, I knew if I tried to clear it with Mallory, there'd be a whole song and dance, and I just didn't have the time. And orders are orders, well, officers like that shit because it works for them, don't they? For the rest of us, it just gets in the bleeding way. After that conversation, Greg Mallory finally arrives at the boys' office, and they discuss the latest goings-ons in the Scorchers and Julian Baxter Pugh case, and some conversation that they've picked up on their bugs. In one of the recorded conversations, you could hear the Scorchers were asking Baxter Pugh when they were finally going to see some action, and Baxter Pugh told them it's only been a few days and to be patient. See, the Scorchers, they need to have their first superhero fight against some villains to really get fully launched and accepted by the media and the world. The problem is, Von American superhero development doesn't love the idea of Baxter Pugh and this MediaCorp wing of the company having their own line of soups out there competing with them, so they aren't playing ball at all, and are not being cooperative and not providing any villains for the Scorchers to fight. Mallory, seeing an angle here, decides to do something that might seem counterintuitive. Mallory thinks that they, the boys, should actually help this new Scorchers team get off the ground without a hitch. Butcher asks, "Hang on, we want another team of heroes out there? Why?" Mallory explains that we want to stir the pot. The greater Vought's internal problems, the easier our job. So Mallory wants these Scorchers to become legit to the world, have their first superhero fight against some villains, and then Vought's internal teams will be fighting it out amongst themselves. The greater the internal problems at Vought, the easier the boys' job will be. After the meeting, Butcher, he goes and writes in the diary some more. He writes to Becky that the work he is doing with Mallory and the boys isn't enough. Cracking a few skulls isn't gonna get them anywhere. It's gonna take a whole lot more than that to get things done. So this is the moment that Butcher decided that he needed to kill them all of these soups out there in the world. Issue 5, Wednesday. This issue begins with Hughie, Annie, and Bobby all having dinner over some wine. Bobby shares memories of Hughie when they were younger and all the various adventures they used to go on. Bobby also talks about how his medication for his transitioning is going to become a lot more expensive once this Brexit stuff goes through. Anyway, we jump back in time once again, and we see Butcher's next meeting with this Vicar. Vicar is reporting into Butcher what he learned. Vicar apparently went to Payback Mansion to see what he could find out. Payback Mansion is usually where Stormfront hangs out at. And at that mansion, he heard Julian Baxter Pugh and Stormfront arguing in the next room, arguing loudly. Apparently, Baxter Pugh asked Stormfront if he wanted to get in on the ground floor of his new superhero group, and he wanted Stormfront to dress up as a villain and stage a fight against his new team to help him out. Stormfront loudly said no, and I can't blame him. Stormfront ain't doing that shit. And they argued about it some more. Baxter Pugh, he was saying, "Hey man, I came all the way out here out of respect for you. I thought we had something." And Stormfront shot back, "We have nothing. We never did." And Baxter Pugh, he was pushing back, saying, "Come on, don't be ridiculous. Do you honestly think if I say Grand Savannah, the world's gonna end?" And Stormfront, to this, he replied, "It will end for you, Englander." And then Baxter Pugh just sort of awkwardly laughed. And that was about the end of it. Then Baxter Pugh left. Afterwards, Vicar said that he went to go talk to Stormfront a bit, see if he could get any info about him. Vicar asked who that Baxter Pugh guy was, and Stormfront just played it down and said, "He's just some piece of shit who wanted me to dress up like the Grim Reaper and play fight his new team." Stormfront asked Vicar what he wanted, and then Vicar replied, "Oh, I'm just checking in." And then after that, Stormfront told him to fuck off, and Vicar left. And now here he is, talking to Butcher. Now during this conversation with Butcher, Vicar, he still has that bug that Butcher planted on him earlier on his helmet. Vicar, now finishing his conversation with Butcher, eventually leaves. Butcher then asks Mother's Milk, does the recordings from the bug that they planted on Vicar earlier match the story that he just told them right now? Mother's Milk, who was checking the bug record, says that the story checks out. Mother's Milk asks Butcher, did he get the bug back? And Butcher says he couldn't. And MM replies, shit. They really don't want the wrong people to see that bug. The boys then head over to Yankee Stadium. They learned from the bug that was on Vicar that the Scorchers are finally having their first superhero fight with some villains. It's gonna be going down at Yankee Stadium. Julian Baxter Pugh apparently called in half a dozen media outlets to document this first fight, And he hired some shitty actors to play the villains. And the Scorchers are gonna fight them and take them down, and thus it will officially launch them. The boys want the Scorchers to get launched, as it will create internal strife at Vought. However, the boys suspect that Vought American's Superhuman Development Division may have been tipped off by Stormfront, and they will attempt to interfere in this plan today, and sure enough, that is exactly what goes down. The boys see on the security camera footage a team of Vought heroes dressed in green that Vought sent from Superhuman Development. And elsewhere in the stadium, we see the hired actors that Baxter Pugh hired to form a villain team called the Malevolence. And the Malevolence are stretching in their dressing room, preparing for their fight with the Scorchers, preparing to throw the fight and lose. And the Malevolence begin walking out to the field, but before they get there though, they are stopped by Vought's other hero team in green. The boys join in, and they beat the shit out of Vought's heroes, the team in green, killing some of them even. The Malevolence are freaking out. They're just actors, they didn't sign up for this. But Butcher tells them, "You're running late, aren't you? You was paid to do a job, remember? Better head on out there and fight the Scorchers." The Malevolence are asking who Butcher and the boys are, and who is this other hero team? Butcher, he grabs the severed hand of the Wolverine type hero that they just killed, and holding his claw hand, points it at the Malevolence, and he tells them, "Mr. Baxter Pugh hired you to put on a show, and he hired us to make sure you made it. Now get your asses out there and get to work. And not a word to no one, not even him. He don't like complications. You believe me if I say we know how to find you." The Malevolence, scared of Butcher, run out into the field to fight the Scorchers. We jump back in time a bit to when Becky was still alive. Butcher and her are lying in bed one night, and she asks him, "Billy, what would you do if I was gone?" And Butcher asks her, "Why, are you okay?" And she is, but she just wants to know if something ever happened to her, if he'd be okay without her. She knows that Butcher has this violent, dark past. She says, "You sometimes talk about me like I'm more than what I am, Billy. Like I'm this thing you put all your hopes into. You wouldn't be no good without me, and I know we joke about it, and I know there's things I'd like you to do different, but you're your own man, Billy Butcher. I want to be sure you know it, too." Butcher says he was a bleeding disaster without her before, and Becky concedes, "You was a right handful, I ain't denying that, but you're the one that made the changes to your life." She asks again, "You'd be alright without me, Billy? You'd be sad for a while, but you'd be alright?" And Butcher mumbles, "I'd kill the fucking world." And Becky says, And Butcher just replies, "Nothing." Now we jump to the current day, Hughie reading the diary of Butcher's writing. In the diary, Butcher wrote, "You always made me honest, love, so I'll be honest now. I hate them. I hate them all. Not just the one that done what he done to you. I've got something special in mind for him." So he's referring to the superheroes of the world, especially the Homelander here. Butcher continues, "I want them all gone. That means an awful lot of people. Most of them are supes, so that means either evil bastards or dozy twats who haven't got a clue, but it also means people who don't even know. That's why I need to get rid of you, Becky, so I can do something that would have made you hate me." So once again, Butcher reiterates his need to get rid of Becky's consciousness in him that is stopping him from doing what he feels he needs to do to get rid of all the supes. Now we see Hughie was reading this diary on the toilet in the bathroom. He's been reading this diary secretly and not telling Annie about it, and he tries to hide the diary to keep it quiet from her. But it looks like Hughie failed because as he leaves the bathroom, Annie is outside there waiting for him, and she points her finger at Hughie and calls Hughie an idiot. Issue 6, Thursday. The next morning, Hughie and Annie are talking in the kitchen. Hughie asks Annie if he's in trouble with her. Annie plays it coy and says, "Why would you ever think that?" Hughie, ashamed, asks her that when she knew he had the diary and was keeping it quiet from her. Annie says, fairly early on, all your midnight bathroom visits and sitting under your tree on the hill. She also says that Hughie is the world's worst liar. Also, she found the diary, read a page, realized what it was, and put it away, and wanted to see if Hughie would come clean with her. Hughie apologizes to Annie. Annie tells Hughie that he's not some tough guy that has to keep everything all bottled up. Butcher was like that, and look what it cost him. But Hughie, that's not him. We jump back in time now to the Scorchers at Yankee Stadium. The Scorchers have just beat up the Malevolence and are being interviewed by the press there and are excited about all the attention. We see the cops arresting the Malevolence and taking them away. The boys back at their HQ see all the hoopla on the TV about the Scorchers now. The boys start discussing the recent Scorchers buzz. Mother's Milk and Frenchie are talking to Greg Mallory, and they wonder why on all their bugs that they have at the 7 HQ, why haven't the 7 even mentioned the Scorchers at all? If this really is a big deal at Vought and causing all this internal strife, and if the 7 are Vought's meal ticket, why doesn't it seem like a bigger deal that this Baxter Pugh is launching his own team? Butcher, he finally arrives back at the boys' HQ and joins the others. He tells his theory that he thinks Vought American is actually playing the boys. Vought doesn't like Baxter Pugh. Baxter Pugh is a liability because of that whole Grand Savannah scandal in the past. And the Scorchers are a joke. Butcher suspects that Vought American knows a little bit about their team. They don't know all the details, but someone starts killing your soups, even the odd one here and again. Vought probably used their contacts and found out that the boys were a US government-backed team that was sent to watch over them and keep them in check. And Vought American probably figured out that they could use the boys, manipulate them, and make them work for them in a way, like maybe help them get rid of some of their rubbish. Vought was just trying to draw the boys out. Vought knew the boys would take interest in this new team and try to capitalize on creating strife at Vought. Vought even knew to send in a team of real soups to stop the fake soups or the fake villains who were there to give the Scorchers credibility. Mallory says because Vought knew that we would expect them to do that. We'd smell some kind of strife at Vought and do anything we thought would help to stir the pot. Butcher's right. Yankee Stadium gave the Scorchers credibility with us. And Butcher adds that means Vought American knows how we think. Mallory asks to speak with Butcher alone for a minute in his office. Mallory says he's going to refer this situation to Langley and see what they say. But Mallory thinks that Butcher should have talked to him privately instead of trying to undermine him in front of the rest of the team. So we get a sense of the underlying disagreements that Butcher and Greg Mallory have here. Butcher says, I think it was going about things the way we do that tipped them off. All it does is put them on notice. If it don't go anywhere, it ain't ever gonna solve the problem. Butcher then leaves Mallory's office. So here, Butcher is expressing his disagreement with Mallory's long-term soft approach, and he thinks they should be more aggressive. We jump back to the present day with Hughie and Annie. Hughie explains why he didn't tell Annie about the diary. He says he figured that he would just keep it to himself and try to sort it out by himself, and then it was just too late to tell Annie. Too much time has passed. He already feels like he's on thin ice with her because he knows Annie is mad that Hughie hasn't figured out this whole getting married thing yet. The last thing he wanted to do was piss her off even more and have her walk out on him. Annie calls Hughie a shithead and explains that if I haven't left you by now, I think it's pretty obvious I'm not going to unless you do something really egregious. Annie tells Hughie what he needs to do now. She says, "You need to find out who sent you the diary. It must be someone from the old days. Start with a list of who survived and work your way through it. Find out who it is, go see them if you have to, tell them to leave us alone. Then come back here so we can get on with our lives. And when you do, absolutely, positively, definitely, beyond the shadow of a doubtly, no more secrets." Okay, I think that's it. She then pours the mixing bowl on Hughie's head and says, "Get the idea?" Hughie replies, "Yeah," and Annie says, "Great." Issue 7, Friday. We jump back in time once again. This is after Becky died. Butcher is now back into his violent asshole phases of his life. And we see Butcher. He is on the job for the boys in England. He runs into an old acquaintance of his, someone who used to be friends with him and Becky, whom always annoyed Butcher and Butcher never really liked. Butcher would always be polite to this man in the past because Becky was there, but this man had some very annoying political views that Butcher didn't jive with. The man, who recognizes Butcher from his past, says hello to him and asks Butcher to go for drinks with him. The man talks about politics with Butcher. He talks about how heartless Margaret Thatcher's conservative policies are, but she wins because the working class people cannot be convinced to stop voting against their own interests. They have the illusion that they can make it big, that anyone can better themselves if they just play their cards right, so they turn their back on society, on notions of compassion or cooperation, and they run willingly like lambs to the slaughter to a glorious golden future that isn't there. And they can't see it. It's right in front of them, but they can't see it. Butcher then makes the ineloquent argument, "You ever think that they just don't want any other person getting what's theirs?" Butcher then smugly says to the man, "You were always like this, mate. And in 20 or 30 years, you'll have another frickin' political disaster and you'll be sitting here saying exactly the same thing." Now, Butcher, he feels like he's a working class guy and that this guy sort of looks down on him for it. Butcher says to the man, "Blokes like you go on about working class people. You ain't one of them, but you talk like you understand them. You saying they're like sheep." That's the line, isn't it? We're like sheep because we're so easily led. That's why we go for this shit? But did it ever occur to you that we ain't? Someone puts something on the table and we go for it. And we don't give a bollocks about anyone left behind. We're so frickin' thick, we don't even know that's what we're doing. Well, what if we do know? Would that sound like a frickin' sheep to you? What if we ain't sheep? What if we're wolves? The man replies to Butcher, This is the Billy Butcher I never knew, isn't it?" Alright, before I continue on in the story, I really felt that this scene was a diversion. And I contemplated cutting it for my recap, but I wanted to leave it in so you could see how Garth Ennis really kind of goes on these random tangents in this series. So I was trying to analyze this scene and figure out, what is Garth Ennis trying to tell us here? Garth Ennis seems to be making the point that the liberal guy here is being a wanker. He's not a working class guy, but he talks about how gullible the working class is, voting conservative because they are sheep. And Butcher, I think his argument is that working class people aren't sheep, they're just assholes who are wolves, and they just take what they want, and that's why they vote conservative and don't give a shit about anyone else. I think that's what Butcher's argument was, I guess. I think Garth Ennis thought he was making some sort of profound statement here, but I think he's just kind of meandering randomly. Anyway, we jump forward a bit and we see when Butcher was meeting this vicar once again. Vicar is a little jumpy and startled to see Butcher. Butcher asks him if he has any more info on the Scorchers, and Vicar says that he's been keeping his ear to the ground, but no one's been saying much of anything about them since they last talked. Vicar also shares that Scandia died. She overdosed on painkillers in the ICU. It's a shame because she was a wild cat in the sack. Butcher asks Vicar, "You didn't tell anyone about our fight with all the children of Stormfront, did ya?" And Vicar, nervous, says, "Come on, you know me better than that by now. I'm not about to get stupid, yeah?" And Butcher replies, "Fair enough. We were just wondering if it might be time for you to fall in battle, that's all." And Vicar, confused, says, "Huh?" And Butcher continues, "Nothing. Here, look at that." Vicar asks, "What the?" And we see the female's stuffed animal is on the ground. And Butcher tells Vicar to pick it up. And Vicar asks, "Why?" And Butcher just tells him, "Just pick it up. Go on." Alright, so we don't have any follow-up to this scene. I'm thinking that maybe Butcher killed Vicar, because when Butcher said, "Just wondering if it might be time for you to fall in battle," and then forcing Vicar to pick up the stuffed animal for no reason. So that's why I think he killed him, but I have no confirmation on that, and I don't really know why Garth Ennis didn't decide to make it more clear. But anyway, moving on. We jump back to Annie and Hughie in the current day. Hughie is psychoanalyzing Butcher to Annie, saying how it's not fair that Becky is going to be forgotten to history. The way that Butcher writes about her, she seemed like an amazing woman. Hughie comments on how much Butcher loved Becky. For moments when Hughie and Butcher were together in the past, Butcher would sometimes fall back to his softer, more emotional side and reminisce to Hughie about his wife. And Butcher would say things like, "I loved my wife, Hughie. Becky was her name. She made you believe in things." But then Butcher would kind of snap out of it and go back to his cold-blooded, kill-everybody mindset. Hughie discusses with Annie about how Butcher came up with this big, bloody, genocidal plan to kill all the Supes, which is what we saw Butcher try to pull off at the end of the original Boys series. Butcher, he tried to convince himself that he killed Becky and could go through with it, but even then, Butcher set up a sort of failsafe to perhaps stop him from going through with it, and that failsafe was Hughie. Butcher left Hughie alive. Hughie was like Butcher's younger brother Lenny. Lenny would always stop Butcher from wrecking things when they were kids. So in a way, Butcher kept Hughie alive to potentially stop him from going through with his genocidal plan. And that is what ended up happening in the original series. Hughie stopped Butcher. Hughie feels that Becky was such a good person, and he feels that people should be shouting her name from the rooftops, and she deserves so much better than what she got. Hughie is in a way talking about sharing Becky's story with the world, maybe even sharing Butcher and the boys' story with the world. But Annie sets Hughie straight. She says, "There's no what Becky deserves any more than there's what Becky would have wanted. What Becky deserved, Hughie, was not to be raped by that monster Homelander in the first place, and not to be killed by its disgusting spawn so that she could live out the rest of her life with the man she loved. If you start talking about doing anything in her name or whatever, how are you any different to him, to Butcher? He knew that she wouldn't have wanted the stuff he went on to do, right?" Hughie and Annie, they talk some more, and Annie eventually reiterates to Hughie that he needs to just find out who sent him the diary, so that he can put that to bed, and then when he is done with that, the two of them can live their happily ever after together. Jumping back in time to Butcher and Greg Mallory talking. Mallory got some hidden camera footage from one of the Legends contacts at Victory Comics. And in that hidden camera footage, they see Baxter Pugh given a speech internally at one of Von American's functions. And Baxter Pugh in this speech says, We don't have to follow the normal superhuman development model, which is really just the same 6 or 7 individuals with their costumes colored differently each time. If we want to use ideas from pop culture, if we feel like exploiting some of the notions we've popularized at MediaCorp, we can. Sky is quite literally the limit. Let's be honest, shall we, when it comes to superheroes? People lap this shit up. I know it, you know it, we all do. So this was a pretty controversial speech that this Baxter Pugh guy said to everyone. Mallory explains that some of the employees at Vought are true believers in this stuff. Even the corporate officers at Vought can get kind of sentimental about the product, and the idea of rubbing the public's collective face in the banality of the product, that might be seen as sailing too close to the wind. Butcher replies, yeah, if you're gonna sell people a load of bollocks, it helps if you don't call it that. He pissed on his chips with just about everyone, didn't he? Mallory confirms that Baxter Pugh indeed pissed off the rank and file employees there, and the board of directors already hated him because of the Grand Savannah scandal. Mallory says that the CIA has given the boys the order to take out Baxter Pugh as well as the Scorchers. Mallory asks Butcher if he wants Frenchie to handle this one, but Butcher says, nah, I'll do it. Mallory explains that the Scorchers are having some sort of a celebration right now, so you'll have no trouble getting to them. As Butcher walks over to the hotel where the Scorchers are, we see Mother's Milk on the street, and we see Frenchie and the female having a steak dinner, the female with her stuffed animals. We see that Butcher has kidnapped this Julian Baxter Pugh and tied him to a chair and blindfolded him. Julian Baxter Pugh is scared. When Butcher removes the blindfold, it is revealed that Butcher has brutally decapitated all the members of the Scorchers, and Baxter Pugh is crying and he says, "What in God's name did you do?" And Butcher to this says, "We had a great conversation about boundaries." Why? What's it look like? Butcher then stares at Baxter Pugh with his bloody axe, and then we assume that Butcher killed Baxter Pugh as well. In Butcher's final diary entry he wrote, "I don't even have the words." No big surprise there. I know writing's beyond a Burke like me. There's all sorts of tricks to it I just can't get my head around. But even if I was good at it, I don't think the words for you exist. I stood there after I'd done what I'd done and thought, too late now anyway. It's over and done with. She's gone. There was this brilliant girl come out of nowhere and picked me. I tried, but I don't have the words for that, Becky, because at the end of the day, all I can say is goodbye, love. Billy. Issue 8, Epilogue, January. Staying in the present day now, Hughie is now attempting to find out who sent him the diary. He is traveling to go see various suspects from the Boys series past, people who could have potentially sent the diary to him. The first person he travels to see is on a tropical island where pineapples are being grown. The man there has a thick, homeless man's beard and is incoherent. That man is James Stillwell. That's right, James Stillwell. The big bad from the Boys series, the corporate evil as hell Vought executive who was running the superhero program at Vought behind the scenes. If you remember previously in volume 12 of The Boys, James Stillwell, defeated at the end, admitted to himself that the superheroes were a bad product, and that's why he failed. Well, here, we see James Stillwell with a beard and full-on crazy. He is just looking at pineapples, talking about economist Milton Friedman and saying, "This is a basic economic unit. I've told you, and I've told you again and again, it's not what it is. It's a question of intrinsic value, and it's a good product, and that's important because if you don't have a good product, you can't corner the market, and I know because once I tried with a bad product, a very bad product, and there were problems. Money, no object. Good product, good product." But Milton, he didn't have to face what I did, and I faced it when it flew right up to my office window, and I looked it right in the eye. And I had a plan in place, but it all fell apart when it turned out I had a bad product. What we want to do is start from scratch, but with the basic economic unit. Hughie realizes that James Stillwell is too far gone to have been the one that sent him the diary. Apparently, James Stillwell has been here for the last decade. Hughie then goes to visit the next suspect. It is Kessler, aka Monkey, aka the guy the boys used to push around for info. Kessler is in his office at Kessler Consulting Incorporated. He is told that there is a Mr. Butcher to see you, sir. Kessler, who is scared as hell of Butcher, panics, saying, "No, it's not possible." Kessler tries to escape out his window, but Hughie is there to stop him. Kessler swears at Hughie, messing with him, pretending that Butcher is alive again. They go back into Kessler's office to talk. They discuss the diary that Hughie received and potentially who sent it to him. Kessler, he's not the one that sent the diary. Kessler suspects that it wasn't any of the remaining soups. All of the survivors are really just the shitty ones. Kessler asks Hughie, "Are you sure Greg Mallory isn't still alive? He may have sent it." Hughie confirms indeed that Mallory is dead. Kessler also worries to Hughie that if news got out on the boys' past, that if the truth got out that the CIA ran a team targeting superheroes, that the soups could easily be made to look like the victims. And the coup in 2008, when all the soups attacked Washington, could be misinterpreted as some sort of patriotic first strike against the political swamp. Well, Kessler isn't much more help than that for Hughie, so Hughie goes on to visit his next suspect that may have sent him the diary, and it is Susan Rayner, the ex-director of the CIA, the woman who used to give the boys their orders. She had vast political ambitions, but those were squashed when a sex tape of her and Butcher was leaked. Susan Rayner is in fact the person that sent Hughie Butcher's diary. She says to Hughie, "You were supposed to get triggered by it and freak out as publicly as possible, and purge yourself the way you snowflakes do and vomit everything out there to the world." Hughie admits that the love of Annie kept him clear-headed enough to not do that, and plus all the stuff that they did in the boys back in the day, no way anyone in their right mind would put that out there for the world. Hughie asks Susan, "Did you think that you could spin some sort of political comeback out of this if it got out?" Susan explains the way the story would spin if Butcher and the boys' history got out was that she was just one woman caught at the center of the maelstrom, struggling to hold the line as privileged, entitled white men run out of control. She says there are still people in power who are interested in her. Susan then grows angry. Monica Lewinsky got her redemption arc. Where's hers? Susan feels like she put in her damn time at the government. She spent a quarter of a century. She was supposed to go all the way, implying that she might have even been president one day. Hughie chastises her and says that she was playing with fire. Hughie says there's still soups out there and there's plenty of Compound V and all. We do not need those frickin' walking nuclear erections getting a chance at redemption. We don't need folks thinking that they can profit off of those soups again, or use them as a distraction. I mean, can you imagine what that Bam in the Oval Office would do with soups, referring to Trump here? Susan Rayner implies to Hughie that she might tell the world about the boys' past anyway on her own. She doesn't need Hughie. She says, "I don't need some man boy still traumatized from his time at the center of it all any more than I need Butcher's love letter to a corpse. I come clean about what I know. Oh, I'll be a lot of people's hero." So she suspects that by doing this, it might make her relevant again, and then she can run for office. Hughie plays a tape recording he has of Susan Rayner, back in the days when she was the decision maker on what bombs got dropped where and what wars. And in this audio recording, There's a pilot in Afghanistan, and he is asking for authorization to drop a bomb on a village. But the target was a civilian one, and it just had women and children in it. And Susan Raynor gave the order. She said, complete that mission. And this would not look good to the world if this got out. Hughie is basically threatening Susan Raynor with this, that if she ever tries to talk about the boys and the past with the hopes of turning it into some sort of political ambitions, well, this should kill any chance she has at that, so she should just stay quiet. Hughie puts on his jacket and prepares to leave Susan's office. Susan says to Hughie, "You do know what he was, don't you?" referring to Butcher. "He told me we deserved each other. You remember that when you're thinking about him drenching himself in gore to kill her memory," referring to Becky. "You just remember who he ended up with." Hughie asks her, "You read the diary then?" And Susan replies, "Of course I frickin' read it." Hughie says, "Well, he tried to kill her," referring to Becky. "But at the end of the day, there were things he just couldn't do." So Hughie is implying here that Butcher perhaps was never really successful in killing the memory of his wife, and that is why Butcher was never able to go through with his genocidal plans to kill all the Supes without having that fail-safe, without creating a way for Hughie to stop him. Before Hughie heads out the door, he says to Susan, "Did anyone decent ever love you, Madam Director?" And Susan, furious, throws her glass of scotch at Hughie. And with that, Hughie has resolved the mystery of who sent him the diary, and he has made sure none of that info will get released to the world. Hughie then returns to Scotland and is ready to live his happily ever after with Annie. Hughie is going to go through with marrying Annie, and we see it is their wedding day, and Bobby is Hughie's best man, or maid of honor perhaps, not sure. They wait for Annie, and she eventually walks into the church in her wedding dress, and Hughie is elated and happy to finally be going through with this, and they get married. Later on one night, Hughie burns the diary in a fireplace, making sure it never gets out into the world. Hughie then writes on a piece of paper, "Dear Becky, you were with him all the way." I guess implying that despite Butcher's evil plans, he could never really kill Becky fully in his mind. Hughie then inserts the paper message into a glass bottle, corks it, and throws it as a message in a bottle out into the ocean, and with that, the mini-series ends. Alright, so that was The Boys, Dear Becky mini-series. I would love to hear some of your thoughts on this mini-series in the comments, whether you liked it or disliked it. Now, with regards to me, I was very disappointed by it. I didn't think it was very good, and I'm a big Boys and a big Garth Ennis fan, so it pains me to say that, but no, I did not like it. I think it was very bad in many ways. What I did like, though, I liked that we got to see James Stillwell again. One of my favorite characters from the original series. Such an evil son of a bitch, so scary. Now we see him as this crazed homeless man mumbling about economics and saying bad product over again, which is a great callback to the original series, so love that. I liked seeing some more of Hughie and Annie in the current day and seeing them finally get married, so at least we have the happy ending to send them off on. That was good. Some of the classic Boys adventure we had some of it was good, with the Scorchers, seeing the boys have to scheme to take them down. But on to some of the negatives in this series. With regards to that whole Scorchers storyline in the past, I found it to be very messy and convoluted. So there's lots of internal politics within Vought American between this Julian Baxter Pugh and the Scorchers and Vought American's superhero group within the company, and them scheming and them trying to get the boys to get rid of the Scorchers for them. It was just not very clearly written, and I didn't think it was very compelling in the end, unfortunately. Some of the Butcher and Vicar stuff I thought was kind of fun. But with the way that kind of storyline ended, with Butcher just brutally killing everyone, and we see the Scorchers just decapitated. I really felt like that ending kind of came out of nowhere, and it just wasn't the greatest way to wrap up that whole storyline. With regards to the diary subplot, I don't think there was anything that profound that came out of it. We had got to see some happy moments between Becky and Butcher, which was nice, but this analysis of Butcher and how he has to metaphorically kill Becky and the deep meaning we're supposed to get from that, I don't think Garth Ennis really hit the nail on the head there. And then the fact that Susan Rayner is the one that sent the diary to Hughie for her own convoluted reasons, hoping it could somehow help her political career, that wasn't the best laid out. And then her and Hughie having this confrontation, which is supposed to be really impactful, kind of petered out and didn't really hit the nail on the head there either. So just lots of misses, lots of swings and misses in this. Now, with regards to all the politics stuff, there was just too much of it. And I'm kind of interested in Garth Ennis's political thoughts. I would read a blog post about it, but within the context of the Boys miniseries, it doesn't come out the best. And it seems kind of inconsistent sometimes what his political thoughts are, a little bit all over the place, and a little bit too much, and it distracts from the story. So there's just so many things in this book that don't work. And yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to give it a 5.5, maybe 6. I'll go 6. 6 out of 10. The Russ Braun artwork was still top notch, and I enjoyed that. And there was hints of stuff of the Classic Boys series that we did get to see in here, so that was good. But it was disappointing in the end. Thank you all for watching. I'm going through American Vampire right now. I will be back next week with Volume 6, so check out that series if you have not, and I will see you all again in the future.